Hey folks, it is Brian Nemhauser at Hawkblogger on Instagram and Twitter. Here for your Wednesday, what is it, September 11th? Yeah, I should know that. September 11th update on Wednesday press conferences and injury report. We have not gotten the injury report as of yet. Practice will wrap up here a little bit later and we'll get the official injury report. We did get some injury updates from the press conferences today and I'll share those. We talked to Mike McDonald, as we always will on Wednesdays. We talked to DK Metcalf. We talked to Riq Woolen. So I'll talk to you about what I learned in those discussions. And for folks that are just tuning in for the first time, practice report wise, we only get to see them stretch and warm up at the beginning. So, not going to really share much detail about the practice. And I'm not going to share who was in dressed or not. I'll leave that to the beat guys. If Bob Condata or Brady or Mike Dugar, one of those guys, tweets it out, you can find it there. I'm going to stay well away from that line. My interests lie primarily elsewhere. So what I found in the press conference today, so, I asked a few questions of Mike McDonald, and one of them was, the Seahawks happened to be playing their first two games of the season against their last two Super Bowl opponents. What do you remember about those two games? And he hadn't thought about that and thought that was kind of cool, but didn't have a lot to say about those games. I mean, 11 years ago would have been, really about 10 years ago would have been, well, yeah, closer to 11. Anyway, he would have been the 2013, technically 2014 when it happened, Super Bowl over the Broncos. 11 years ago, Mike McDonald was 26. So just to give you some impression of how young he is. Obviously, the next year he's 27. And he didn't have a lot to say, honestly. I think he was taken off guard by the question. I thought about asking him about the infamous play on the 1 yard line and what he saw in that play from a defensive perspective and what he saw in it from, a play calling perspective. But I knew that would put him in a tough spot. And I didn't feel like putting him in a tough spot after he clearly was surprised to even ask, to be asked about those games in general. I also asked him about Bill Belichick, who is not with the Patriots any longer, but is on the Mount Rushmore of defensive coaches in the league and coaches overall, and wanted to know what kind of influence he had and what he thought, what his impressions were of Bill Belichick. And, he talked about how much respect, obviously, he's, thinks he's the best that's ever done it. Talked about the fact that really from a characteristic standpoint, the thing that he really remembered was toughness. Toughness, attention to detail, and being really, really consistent with that. I was going to ask him a little bit more about it, but I'd already asked a bunch of questions, so I didn't want to hog the whole press conference. But I was interested. Bill Belichick's known for designing defenses week to week to maximize how to play certain opponents. And Mike McDonald is building that reputation as well. And so I was kind of curious if that was something that he admired about Bill Belichick, but didn't get a chance to ask that question. What I did ask him was a little bit more of the football geeky stuff, because I think Mike McDonald wants to talk about that stuff. And what I asked him was, the Patriots ran inside zone more than any other team in football as a percentage of their runs in week one. It was 44%. So almost half their running plays were inside zone. Ramondre Stevenson had almost all of his yards after contact. All his 120 rushing yards were after contact. So you've got a downhill running team coming right at you with a running back that breaks tackles. What are your coaching points for your defense in that situation? And he gave an awesome answer. I loved the answer he gave. He was like, I think based off the fronts that the Bengals were playing and the success that the Patriots were having, they stuck with that more than they might in other systems, and that he believes they have more flexibility, variance, diversity, I think was the word he used, in their play calling on offense in terms of types of runs. But that, they'll see that. But that, yeah, they've got to be able to really square things up and make sure that they're containing that and, tackling well, because it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to go up against that kind of scheme where they're running right at you and you got a very physical running back. So I think he wants to answer football questions. I think he likes to geek out on that stuff. And I think he seemed to appreciate that question and added, I thought, some cool insights that we don't always get. Like, Pete wouldn't often go into schematic stuff. And Mike seems to have found his footing in terms of being able to answer questions like that without giving away anything. Like, there was nothing given away in that answer, but it did help give a little insight into how he sees football and how he scouts other teams. So I thought that was kind of cool. There were some injury updates I'll give you as well. So I think the biggest news was that George Fant was not ruled out. They were not talking about IR, and the conversation was more about whether he'd be at practice today. And he said he's essentially day-to-day. He said the same thing with Kenneth Walker, which you could decide if that's good news or bad news. But he said Kenneth Walker and George Fant are day-to-day. Just reading the tea leaves, I think that really just means George Fant going on IR seems like off the table, which is a good thing, because it really looked like when he was ruled out that quickly on a non-contact injury with his knee, with his age, I think you just assume the worst. And it sounds like that's not the case. Don't know that for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if he did not practice today. We'll find out later today when they release the official practice report. But I don't think that necessarily means he wouldn't play in the game. But we'll see. If nothing else, it seems like he may, even if he misses this week, it seems like he may be available sooner than we thought. And if you think about the fact that Abe Lucas is due to come back after week 4, you only need him for a few more weeks as a starter. So it would be great if Fant can come back, even not this week, but next week. That would be huge. So I think that was a big bit of news. Kenneth Walker, we'll have to wait and see. I would have rather just have him say that he's fine, no big deal, but we'll see. It wouldn't shock me there if he was not practicing today either. I think they want to be always careful with these core kind of abdomen injuries, especially for a running back. And the other piece that I'd bring up there is DK Metcalf. When I asked him about, hey, do you like switching it up a little bit, and when you have corners defending you all the time, do you like to be able to aggressively get your hands on them and block in the run game? And he gave this long answer about, yeah, he does, and he especially likes doing it because Ken Walker, you never know which gap he's going to choose. He can go, the running can be designed to one side, he goes the other side. But then he added, and I don't think people, know Zach Charbonnet and Kenny McIntosh can do that too. And I didn't think much about it at the time, but then reflecting on it, I am wondering if DK is kind of thinking that Ken might not be available and that these other guys are going to get more reps. That's not a report. No one's saying that. I'm just reading between the lines, wondering if that's the case. So we'll see. We'll see what comes for that. And if Kenneth Walker needs to miss a week, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But I wouldn't assume that that's happening. It's just kind of what I'm looking at heading into this game. Other injury news: Pharaoh Brown, tight end formerly of the Patriots, who will be is really wanting to play this game. Mike McDonald said he really wants to face his former team, and we'll see by the end of the week. That gives you an impression that I wouldn't be surprised if he's not practicing today. And that, again, he could be one of those guys that they decide whether or not they activate him late in the week or not. I think in general, teams are going to be cautious with players early in the season. You don't want to treat a game like it is a must-win, burn a player that you need for the long haul. It's a physical sport. Attrition's part of it. And I think that my guess is they're going to be more cautious than aggressive in terms of getting guys into the game. But if a guy's ready to play, they'll play him. So don't know. But it sounds like there's at least some optimism that George Fant might be available. Don't know about Kenneth Walker. Nothing negative there necessarily, but nothing positive either. And Pharaoh Brown sounds like slightly optimistic. Uchenna Nwosu was ruled out. Mike said not going to play. So that's the one guy he said not going to play. So I don't think that's bad news about Uchenna, by the way. I think he's on his rehab, his recovery, and if I had to guess, I think that maybe you start giving him a chance to come back next week. But I think the most realistic opportunity is probably against Detroit in week 4. But I think there's a chance maybe next week against Miami. But we'll see. We'll see. Other bits here. Talk to DK. I had fun with DK and Riq. There's a question I asked Doug Baldwin and Richard Sherman back when they were in their second year in the league. And interviewed them separately and asked them separately, if you guys went one-on-one, who would win? And Doug was like, I would destroy him. And Sherm, to his credit, was like, Doug would probably win. And I decided to ask a variation of that question to Riq and DK. I asked them, if you switch sides, since you go against each other every day in practice, if you guys switch sides and DK, you were the defensive back and Riq was the wide receiver, who would win the matchup? And he smiled and he was like, I've talked about that with him. I think I'd lock him up. He played receiver in college, but I think I'd lock him up. And DK, if you don't know, he played corner in high school. So he joked about the fact that he was a much different size back then. To some extent, Riq is not a different size than DK even now, other than bulk wise, but height wise they're the same. So I asked the same question of Riq, and Riq said, "Oh, I think I'd get him. I played receiver. I think DK's fast. I have to give him a double move or something." So it's funny. Those guys are having fun. I also asked Riq, one of my interviews with Trey Brown, with Jarek Reed over the offseason, they mentioned just how the DB room was really trying to spend time together. They were going bowling. They really wanted to have fun, and they wanted to bring the fun into the game for them. And I remember that, and I wanted to ask Riq, how is that time that you guys invested then translate onto the field? And he said it's just having that additional trust and knowing somebody when you're on the field with them just helps. It helps it helps you maybe just be a step faster, be a little bit more confident in your assignments and in their assignments, and also being able to communicate if anything goes wrong or whatever. You've got that relationship built up that you can kind of go back on and rely on. So I thought that was cool. I asked Riq about an undertold story in week 1, because it wasn't the most standout thing, but Riq Woolen, criticized often for his run defense last year, had a positive PFF run defense grade. It wasn't sterling, but it was a 64, which is above average. And I think every Seahawks fan would take an elite cover corner who gets an above average run defense grade every day. I did see him miss one tackle, but I saw other guys. I saw Julian Love miss a tackle too. So I don't think that's the worst thing. But I asked him about run defense. I think he misunderstood and thought I was asking about the overall team run defense. So I didn't really get the answer that I was looking for, but it was good to hear him say, look, they're going up against another team that likes to run the ball, and they've got to be ready to shut that down. And he had talked about how he worked on his whole body this offseason and how that's different. And I just think that's a really big part of his progression is being able to be a complete cornerback and be able to, be effective on those plays as well. What else? DK talked about the fact that he's given up social media largely. It's been months since he was on social media. He talked about kind of since last October. I didn't look back at this, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was around the time of the infamous Kyle Shanahan targeting DK timeframe. I don't know. I haven't looked back at the calendar, but it wouldn't be surprising if that's correlating. But that he's just found himself not needing it and having a simpler life without it, and I commend him on it. I totally appreciate that. Riq said he still does social, but primarily just sending around silly reels and TikToks with his buddies on a thread, and I can relate to that. So yeah, Riq talked about the fact that he did hear a little bit of the chatter on social last year, and that just taught him to, that the media, that fans will love you and then they'll turn on you in an instant, and that you really just got to focus on yourself and not worry about what other people are saying, and that you won't meet almost any of these people ever. And so why even worry about it? I think that's a healthy perspective. I think it does matter to him. And I think these players, I think anybody that says that they don't care what other people think is not completely being honest with themselves. I think everybody cares a little bit about what other people think. I think there's a sliding scale, but the reality is, even someone who's really strong-minded can be influenced by other people's perceptions and other people's words and all those things. In fact, Big Ray Roberts just did a episode on his Garage Grind about how powerful words can be. So that's something you should check out if you missed. I think those were the highlights of the press conferences today and the injury updates. I will be back with you guys tonight for Real Hawk Talk at 6 o'clock with Evan and Jeff. We're going to have a fun time. They were here in Seattle for the opening game, and so we will kind of recap their experiences here. We'll talk about what they saw, what they noticed, and then we'll start talking about the Patriots game, what we're looking for in that matchup as well. Tomorrow morning, I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you haven't already put it on your calendar, 8 a.m. Pacific time, I got Coach Cody Alexander coming on, and we are going to break down what he saw from Mike McDonald's defense in week 1. And then we're going to talk about what he saw from the Patriots defense in week 1 and how these things potentially impact the game. Cody is super he is super into the coach stuff, the film stuff. He knows this stuff inside out. I can't follow some of the stuff he says. I try to slow him down so we can follow it. But I've learned a ton from him the times he's been on. And he was a guy that helped me see that this safety room could be really, really good when nobody else was saying that this safety room could be really good. And so I think he's got great insight. Defensive coaches, just general NFL people follow this guy, respect his work at matchquarters.com. So make sure that you tune in for that tomorrow. And then Friday morning, we got Mike Sando on the Mike Sando show. So that's going to be great. Saturday, I will figure out how to do a Saturday pod before I hop on a plane to Boston to cover the team for all of you. So I'll be in Boston. I got the bad news from Dave Pearson today that it's a not a great press box, that the angle is kind of in the end zone and you don't get to see the game very well. So hopefully they got a good TV, but otherwise we'll figure it out, and I'll get you guys all the coverage you will want and more. So yeah, appreciate all of you. And if you haven't gotten your questions in on patreon.com/hawkblogger for Real Hawk Talk tonight, it's in the Slack channel, 9 a.m. posted there every Wednesday morning. So feel free to post those questions. We'll get to those tonight. All right, everybody. I got a jet, but thanks for tuning in. If you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. If you haven't joined as a YouTube member, think about doing it. We are close to 1,000 YouTube members. You can also gift them. That'll help get us there too. But I appreciate everybody who's been doing that and continuing to grow the community of really, really cool people. So thank you, everybody. Take care. I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram @HawkBlogger. This has been your Wednesday presser and practice report.